Good afternoon to the members of the public and the members of the media. Today, the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the Parliament shall embark upon an examination into the implementation of the 2021 budget with emphasis on the green economy. We shall be joined with officials from the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Planning and Development, and the Environmental Management Authority. I am Bridget Anizet George, and I'm the chairman of this committee. The Committee on Public Administration and Appropriations, the PAAC, has the mandate to consider and report to the House on the budgetary expenditure of government agencies to ensure that expenditures embarked upon in accordance with parliamentary approval. B, the budgetary expenditure of government agencies as it occurs and keep the Parliament informed of how the budget allocation is being implemented. And C, the administration of government agencies to determine hindrances to their efficiency and to make recommendations to the government for improvement of public administration. The purpose of this meeting is to examine the implementation of the 2021 budget with emphasis on the green economy. The role of this committee is to assist the stakeholders in achieving the efficient delivery of services while ensuring that expenditure is embarked upon in accordance with parliamentary approval, and to determine the challenges being faced and possible solutions to these challenges. This meeting is being broadcast live on Parliament's Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Participants are advised that their microphones should remain muted until recognized by the chair. I will therefore now ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves, and then I will ask in this order the members of the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Planning and Development, and the Environmental Management Authority to introduce themselves. So if we can start with the members of the committee here present.
Good afternoon. Wade Mark, member.
Good afternoon. Yukima Bethelmi, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lisa Morris Julian, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Stephen McClatchy, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Castle Varkas, member.
Okay, thank you very much, members. And if we can now turn, as I said, in the order, Ministry of Finance, then Ministry of Planning and Development, and the Environmental Management Authority. Is the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance present?
Good afternoon. Yvonne Imacharan, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sandra Rambert, Budget Division, Budget Analyst, present.
Good afternoon, Enid Zephyrin, Director of the Strategic Management and Execution Office in the Ministry of Finance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Eden Manzano, Economic Advisor, Strategic Management and Execution Unit, Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rick Javed Ali, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon, everyone. Marissa Gowrie, Deputy Environmental Manager, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kishan Kumar Singh, Head Multilateral Environmental Agreements, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Is there another representative from the ministry?
Good afternoon. I am Mira Ramisa. I am the Acting Director of the Socioeconomic Policy Planning Division, Ministry of Planning and Development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramisa. And then now we go into the EMA.
Good afternoon, Chairman all. Hayden Romano from the Environmental Management Authority.
Good afternoon all. Nisha Ramsahai, Coordinator Strategy and Research from the EMA.
Good afternoon. I'm Theomara Chin, a Coordinator in the Strategy and Research Unit at the EMA.
That's it for us, Chairman.
So thank you, everyone. And therefore, I would invite the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance to make a brief opening statement, if she so wishes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, my colleagues at the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Planning and Development, and all others sitting in the meeting this afternoon. Madam Chair, the Ministry of Finance recognizes its role as an integral stakeholder in the drive for Trinidad and Tobago to achieve green economy status. As such, the Ministry of Finance remains supportive of all the initiatives within the remit of the Ministry of Planning and Development in the thrust to achieve the Vision 2030 objectives in general, and specifically those strategies and initiatives to combat climate change, reducing the country's carbon footprint, and adopting greening technologies in our production and service sector. The Ministry of Finance continues to maintain a continuous collaborative arrangement with the Ministry of Planning and Development on all aspects related to the environment, climate change, and the green economy. We are also very committed and focused in dedicating adequate resources in order to fulfill our obligation in this area. In this regard, the Ministry of Finance will continue to ensure that the Green Fund Executing Unit of the Ministry of Planning and Development is properly resourced to address all projects and initiatives to drive the green economy implementation. Further, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has already started the process of addressing climate change as well as reducing this country's carbon footprint by initiating a number of incentives in this area. Some of these incentives are geared towards achieving energy efficiency in households and industries, harnessing of renewable energy, solar energy towards a cleaner electricity sector, reduction in the use of fossil fuel coupled with market pricing and the reduction in fuel subsidies to reduce the country's carbon footprint, and measures introduced for the reduction in the use of styrofoam and plastic towards a cleaner, healthier environment. Also, the Green Fund provides a mechanism to financially assist organizations and community groups that are engaged in activities related to the remediation, reforestation, environmental education, and public awareness of environmental issues and conservation of the environment. The Ministry of Finance has made a concerted effort to provide appropriate response to the issues outlined in your correspondence, and we hope that the information submitted will assist the committee in its deliberation. The team present here this afternoon is also willing to assist the committee with its further deliberation, and it is hoped that the contribution of the Ministry of Finance as an important stakeholder will contribute to achieving the goals of the government of Trinidad and Tobago in addressing the present issues related to climate change as well as the achieving green economy status. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Permanent Secretary. And I therefore now invite the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Planning and Development to make a brief opening statement, if he so wishes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to all members of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, as well as to my colleagues present virtually. It gives me great pleasure to be present here today on behalf of the Ministry of Planning and Development to engage in discussions with your committee about the implementation of the 2021 budget with emphasis on the green economy. In the Ministry of Planning and Development, we recognize the importance of our environment, and we acknowledge that the interaction between the land, the air, the water, and the biodiversity, inclusive of us human beings, needs to be sustainably managed to preserve the respective individual ecosystems that collectively comprise our environment. Accordingly, we have conscientiously attempted to do our part in implementing Theme 5 of our National Development Strategy, Vision 2030, which places the environment at the center of social and economic development. Together with the recommendations contained in the COVID recovery plan, we have attempted through several individual strategies to ensure that economic activity is appropriately considerate of the environment and that sustainable development without environmental degradation is achievable. Madam Chair, the Ministry of Planning and Development's team looks forward to participating in today's discourse as we recognize that greening the economy is a means to strengthen our country's economic performance through the introduction of new value added economic activities, increased efficiency across all sectors, reduction of waste, and the generation of green jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Permanent Secretary. And I now invite the Managing Director of the EMA to make his opening statement.
Good afternoon again, and thank you, Madam Chairman and the committee for your invitation. Trinidad and Tobago's national environmental policy articulates the priorities determined by the people of Trinidad and Tobago as critical to achieving environmental sustainability and ultimately sustainable development. This policy was approved by Parliament in November 2018. And the policy has 6 priority areas, which are human health through pollution control, sustainably managing natural resources, improving the local environment, and the priority area 4, which is the area that we are focusing on today, is evolving a greener economy. Number 5 is fostering an environmentally responsible society. And number 6 is addressing climate change and environmental and natural disasters. All these priority areas are interconnected and very critical towards the development of Trinidad and Tobago. We at the EMA hope at the end of these deliberations, we will see definitive steps towards sustainable development and the greening of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think to start off the conversation, I'd like to begin where the Managing Director of the EMA, at least jump off from where he started. And this is with the National Environmental Policy and as regards evolving a greener economy and your responsibility in that regard. Now, I've seen in your submission, one, I want to commend the policy document, and particularly in terms of it being broken up with respect to a strategic approach and an implementation plan. And for me, I must commend the strategic approach. I guess what I am really interested in is the implementation plan. And therefore, I am concerned about the point made in your submission where you spoke about your limited resources to develop an implementation plan. And I would like you a bit to develop on that. And therefore, once you do that, I will turn to the Ministry of Finance, which in her opening statement, the Deputy Permanent Secretary spoke about their commitment to provide adequate resources to ensure that her words are the green economy status is achieved. So maybe you can share a bit about the limited resources and how this has impacted on your developing this implementation plan to address the policy statements in the National Environment Policy.
And Chair, thank you for that. But Chair, I think I need to remind all that the National Environmental Policy is not the EMA's National Environmental Policy. It is Trinidad and Tobago's National Environmental Policy. And the EM Act, Section 31, states all government entities shall conduct their operations and programs in accordance with the National Environmental Policy. And therefore, everything that all of us do in government must be aligned to the National Environmental Policy. 1. 2, with respect to implementation of the National Environmental Policy, that is the remit of the National Council for Sustainable Development. At this point in time, I am the chairman of the National Council for Sustainable Development, and the council, in accordance with its terms of reference, have laid out recommendations to the minister with respect to the implementation of the National Environmental Policy. This was done in December of last year, so I think it's still early times, and we are awaiting the response from the ministry whether or not the recommendations with respect to the priority areas, the thematic areas, and the policy statements are approved, and we can move forward with that. Once that happens, we need to establish working groups, because all need to be involved in this process for it to be successful. And resources are constrained, yes, because the EMA is doing this with its existing resources. We have not put in place a unit to deal with the National Environmental Policy, so we're doing it in-house at this point in time. But once the work starts, we would need more resources in terms of a monitoring and evaluation section to ensure that the various government ministries and agencies who are responsible for the policy statements are actually achieving the objectives.
Okay, so that basically, if I understand, the actual execution of anything is a long way off.
Fair to say, because if you go through some of the policy statements, a number of things are actually happening. We have at this point in time, in terms of priority area, in terms of the priority area dealing with waste, which is priority area waste, which is the priority area 1, protecting environmental and human health. We have things like the eye care project. We are looking in terms of the deposit refund system. The EMA waste rules is with the Chief Parliamentary Council, and we expect those rules to be law, before the middle of the year. So a lot is happening. And therefore implementation is taking place. With respect to climate change, and the Ministry of Planning can tell you, the multilateral environmental unit of the Ministry of Planning is doing quite a lot of work with respect to climate change. So it is happening. And maybe what we don't have at this point in time is a unit to say, hey, this is what is going on with respect to the national environmental policy. This is what is going on, and this is the gap. Because we, at this point in time, cannot identify the gaps to you.
Okay, so let me ask this. When you said that this is everybody's own and all ministries and departments have to ensure that they are aligned with the objectives of the national environmental policy, would it be your authority that is in charge of that, ensuring that that alignment takes place? Who's in charge of that?
Correct. And since the policy was approved in December, we have done a number of mainstreaming exercises. So we did a mainstreaming exercise with public agencies in Trinidad, which would have included all the ministries, a lot of the agencies, and we also did one in Tobago. Of course, COVID-19 came along because the next sector that we wanted to look at, which aligns very much with what we're talking about here in terms of greening the economy, was the financial sector, to bring them and to align them with the national environmental policy. And we hope that we can do that before the end of this year. So the EMA is mainstreaming the national environmental policy.
All right. So it is really your responsibility to ensure that there's alignment.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So, and just picking up on something that you said, that you've done certain strategies to ensure mainstreaming. These strategies would have been like what? Training? What are these strategies?
We invited, in terms of the both sessions that we did, we brought all the agencies to a one-day session where we went through every aspect of the NEP, and we requested from them what are their projects that fit into the NEP. So we also have a listing of those projects. What we don't have is what is the status of the projects. We have also, in terms of the annual state of the environment report, which is the EMA's annual reports, we have included the policy state, the priority areas in that report, and we want to be able to report on the NEP in the annual reports of the EMA, which is the state of the environment reports.
Okay, so that those workshops you're talking about is what were held in November and December of 2019.
Yes.
Has there been any follow-up with that to ensure that people are still in tune? Because these were one-day workshops.
They were one-day workshops.
Satisfactory?
And no, of course not. But we've had requests from various agencies questions following up on the workshops. We also have environmental officers in each of these agencies who work with us to make sure that they are our eyes and ears in these agencies to assist with respect to our NEP and the other work of the EMA.
Okay. And therefore, in terms of not having status, so that's 2019. We know a year later.
2020 was a challenge for us. 2020 was a difficult year. 2020, with respect to the NEP.
With respect to?
With respect to the NEP.
What, the EMA, you mean?
No, with respect to the national environmental policy and the mainstream and the implementation of the national environmental policy, 2020, I think, was a challenge.
May I ask why? Why 2020 was a challenge?
I think for one reason was the length of time it took in terms of the appointment of the National Council for Sustainable Development.
Okay. And I see here that 2020 would have affected your workshops.
Yes.
And I'm curious to understand why.
the NEP was part of the work of the EMA, and really at this point in time, the EMA is doing NEP as an addendum to its primary work. 2020 required all hands on board in terms of the pure work of the EMA, in terms of all our regulatory functions, especially as we were working from home and working remotely. So 2020, was a challenge, and therefore, something like the NEP we did not focus on in 2020 until later on in 2020.
All right. So, having said that, because I think the challenge you have identified would have been a challenge that all entities would have experienced in 2020, but most entities were able to quickly recalibrate. And it seems that you have not been able.
Well, that's
just now. These workshops you're telling us about that are going to take place sometime in 2021. Were these workshops planned in 2020?
They were planned in 2020.
And therefore, a year later, when are they going to take place?
We're looking at the second quarter of 2021, which is between April to June, between April and June 2021.
Have you engaged anybody else yet? And so, because as far as I'm concerned, we are at the end of the first quarter. So if you're talking about the second quarter, that is next month.
No, April, May, June.
April, May.
Between
June.
April and June.
All right. Okay, so I will take another turn. I want to invite any member of the committee who would wish to ask some questions. Yes, Member Bacchus.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good day to the Managing Director. In reviewing the information I have in front of me, one of the prime responsibilities of the EMA is monitoring and evaluation. And monitoring and evaluation is actually key, because even though we plan the strategy and we've worked out whether we have or have not worked out the implementation, having a base that identifies where we sit in terms of things that we want to measure in the NEP, and I'm speaking specifically about having a measurement framework, right? Whether it be the inputs, the production, whatever you want to outputs, consumption, however you want to define it, consumption, there are a number of models that you use. Has the EMA been able to establish a baseline as it relates to the pieces within the NEP and to the PAs and TAs associated with it? And if so, are we in alignment with where we need to go? And if not, why not? And how do we get
there? Chair, through you, in accordance with the terms of reference of the National Council for Sustainable Development, the EMA is awaiting the approval of the recommendations of what will be the thematic areas and the policy statements, so that we could move forward, because that has to be approved for us to move forward with respect to the NEP. So we are waiting on the approval from the line minister, and I suspect, So we can't move forward until we get approval.
Madam Chair, true. Again, maybe I'm not interpreting this way. The information I have is, and I don't think you would disagree with me, that you're responsible for the monitoring and evaluation. It also says that there are contributions specific to the SOE as it relates, though limited, in terms of monitoring initiatives, products, and so on that are conducted nationally. To set, so you can't be monitoring something without any KPIs or measurement factors to provide a context to which you're going to measure it. So all I'm asking is, regardless of the approvals of what has to happen in terms of how you go forward, you must be setting a baseline to measure it against. If not, how do you evaluate how the policies be effective? the efficacy of the policies that will be approved to try to implement. That's where I'm going with this. Sorry, maybe I'm not sure if I said it plainly before to you, sir.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, so in terms of priority area, and we call it 4, but it's not number 4 in terms of, there is no hierarchy in terms of the priorities, which is greening of the economy. The thematic area is economic transformation. The policy statement that we have recommended that we move forward with is J, which is to support entrepreneurial efforts aimed to address environmental issues or foster economic prosperity in an environmentally responsible manner. The KPIs or the measures for that versus when we look at priority area 5, which is fostering an environmentally responsible society, the thematic area that we have chosen is 2.19, which is the availability of and public access to information. And the policy statement that we are looking at here is is policy statement A, which is to increase the capacity of government and non-government entities to maintain and provide accurate and legible environmental information of interest to the public via physical and digital media. All I'm trying to say is that depending on the priority area, the KPI will be different. And therefore there is no one KPI for any of the policy statements that have been recommended. And the working groups will have to work with the primary agencies to see what work is happening and what will be the best KPIs to use in terms of measures. So it's a long process, and we are at the start of the process.
Member Bacchus?
Madam Chair, again, through you, and thanks for the response and the clarity. But it does leave us in somewhat of a lurch. What we're saying is we have recommendations for the policy. Because we don't have approvals on the policy, and because of the myriadness and the vastness of the KPIs and measurements that we're dealing with, we're not measuring because they are assigned to the policy. And therefore, we have to wait until that is done before we figure out where we are. So the question that would easily be asked is, where are we? Do we not have to report to this for any international agency? Do we not have to report to this even with the, what is in the SOE?
In the State of the Environment reports, we have identified indicators as they are right now, and they are all included, and it shows where we're doing with respect to the indicators. With respect to the ASOEs, all are with the ministry up to 2019. We expect 2020 will be completed on time because it's due in April of each year. And the EMA tries to submit its annual reports on time. And we are on track to submit the annual report for 2020 by April of 2021. And they are, once they're laid in Parliament, they are available on the website.
Okay, I just find it to be wrong. But Chair, again, too, I just find it wrong. The standard measurements as it relates to, green things under any framework are clear, and I'm sure you understand that while they may be high level and the policies will make them into more granular pieces, I am sure, and I would expect that we would at least have these things measured under inputs easily. Some level of production outputs, the consumption and or its economic impact would be the global way in which I expect this would be done, unless you have a different view
No at all. I mean, we thank you for your comments. We will take them on board, and surely, I mean, we'll make sure, I mean, that when we are closer in terms of developing the monitoring framework, we will surely ask for your comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So what is missing from me, Mr. Executive Director, is this. What is the objective of the national environmental policy? And if there's an objective, what is the time frame by which one expects that this objective will be achieved? Because I would expect that the environment is a certainly very dynamic one. Okay, I'm not talking about the environment. I'm not just talking about the physical, natural environment. That too is dynamic. And if there's anything that COVID-19 showed us, is how very, temporary things are. So if we have a plan, I would expect the plan is also grounded in a time frame. From what I just heard you say that this is going to be a very long time, and you didn't even have to say that. Just from what you were actually laying out, it seemed to me that I might even see this plan in my lifetime. Just hearing you speak. So, one, what is the time frame that was envisaged for this plan? And by the time all these various approvals of Area A and 1 and 2 and 5 and 6, which according to you is not a hierarchical thing, to me they all relate to sustainable development, and talking about green economy is not in isolation. All right? That is the foundation for sustainable development. When are we getting there in terms of the plan as it was envisaged?
Madam Chair, I mean, wow. The last national environmental policy was in 2006. And we feel, I mean, that any environmental policy, any national policy should really be reviewed between every 5 or 7 years. But it took us 15 years to get this new NEP, which is, I mean, it's really not acceptable. This new NEP, this 2018 NEP, one of the significant changes with this NEP is this monitoring and evaluation section. And it is for the exact reason that you have mentioned and Mr. Bacchus have mentioned, that there was no monitoring and evaluation. So we had no idea what we had achieved in the 2006 NEP. And therefore, the significant change with the 2018 NEP is monitoring and evaluation. I think sustainable development is not a destination. I feel it's a process. As you have said, it's going to be very dynamic, it's very complex, and maybe 5 years from now, we will need to relook everything that we have done in this policy, including the policy statements, and make significant changes because, it's not working for us. So in terms of timelines, I wish I could tell you that in 2023, we would have achieved 50% of the over 250 policy statements that are in the NEP. But of course, that will depend on the resources available and the buy-in from the various agencies. Because we need all hands on deck from all the various in Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Agriculture to get these policy statements and these thematic areas accomplished in the NEP.
Okay, so that you have no targets set up front. And I think that's the same sort of question that Member Bacchus is asking.
Yes.
For your agency, which is charged with the monitoring and evaluation, and which is charged with the whole success of this buy-in. You have, as we speak today, no target that you are expecting by, let's say, your same year, 2023. So that in 2023, you can look at it and say, boy, we didn't do too badly, or we failed, or we exceeded our expectations. Is that what I'm understanding?
But your understanding is that the agencies who have prime responsibility for the area need to tell us what is their targets. And therefore, in our monitoring, we'll be able to say whether they or not they are on target or they're off target.
Okay. So these targets have not been got as yet, because I think I'm getting very confused. Because I thought you had told me before that based on these workshops you had in 2019, certain where you tried to get from ministries how they were aligned, that certain information was gathered. I thought that's what I understood.
No, and you're correct. What information in terms of projects that may fit into the NEP from the various agencies. And we are looking at those projects. Whether or not those projects are aligned to the policy statements that we have now selected, that the National Council have recommended to Parliament, they might not be. Because it's not, we're not looking at all 250 plus policy statements at the same time. We don't have the resources to do that. So we have selected policy statements that we will focus on. Because we want to come and say, we have achieved, this is what we have accomplished.
So that if a ministry has a project that is not aligned with one of the targets then that you have identified, but it is within the context of the overall NEP, what happens with that?
Then that is icing on the cake. That because they would be doing something that is within the NEP, aligned to our policy statement, and we could also report on that.
Okay. All right. So let me ask this. The Ministry of Planning and Development, in its response, has said to us that they had two major setbacks in implementing over the past 5 years, the theme 5 of Division 2030, which deals with the environment at the center of social and economic development. And the Ministry of Planning and Development has listed certain challenges, which is sluggish advancement in the conservation and management of the environment, slow progress in mainstreaming climate change, engendering environmentally conscious behavior among the populace, lack of comprehensive disaster risk management policy, delay in formulating, adopting, and implementing a feed-in tariff policy, and inertia in many ministries and agencies. Are you within the remit of your authority? Would the responsibility of any of these challenges lie with you?
No. Off the bat, no.
All right. So I turn to the Ministry of Planning and Development. And this is page 7 of your submission. Okay? So I would ask then if the responsibility for ensuring placing the environment at the center of social and economic development, is that yours in terms of the roles of the different ministries?
Madam Chair, whilst I acknowledge that some of that responsibility would definitely be with the Ministry of Planning and Development, it is required of each various stakeholder to accept their individual responsibilities. So, for example, when reference was made to engendering environmentally conscious behavior among the population, the Ministry of Planning and Development is going to require that collaborative effort from the respective stakeholder agencies to ensure that this is eventually achieved.
Okay, so who takes the lead? Let's take, for instance, inertia in many ministries and agencies to integrate national policy into sectoral policies and strategies. Who takes the lead for that? Who is at fault for this inertia?
Mr. Ramisa, I don't know if you want to interject in...
No, I'm asking you as the Deputy PS. Is that a function for the Ministry of Planning and Development? You see, we would have had you all here before, and I heard things about screening brief, if I remember well, and all of that kind of thing. My understanding, my limited understanding, is that a ministry just don't get funding for a project or go off on a project. They have to come to you all first. And you have this project scanning brief and all of this to ensure that all these things about the project before a ministry could even get a budgetary allocation. And that's my understanding. I might be wrong. And therefore, if I'm wrong, I'll be glad if you correct it for me. All right? But for the Ministry of Planning and Development to tell me that ministries there's an inertia to integrate national policy into sectoral policies and strategies, I really can't understand that. For the Ministry of Planning and Development to tell me lack of comprehensive disaster risk management policy, I really need to know who is responsible. Somebody has to be in charge. Somebody has to be the point to which everybody is accountable. And as I say, I might be wrong, that is the Ministry of Planning and Development. I'll be happy if you could tell the committee who it is.
Sure.
Who's the point? Who's the point?
Sure. And I accept, and your memory, your recollection is correct. There is something called the project screening brief, and that actually, when ministries make proposals for consideration for funding under the public sector investment program, they do have to meet those requirements contained in the project screening brief. And there is that continuous dialogue between ministries and the Ministry of Planning with respect to follow-up on their projects. In fact, that process for the current fiscal, going into the next fiscal year, is currently underway. But unfortunately, in reference to the inertia that many ministries and agencies may have experienced in calendar 2020 in particular, given the global scenario of the pandemic and several other factors that have been referenced by various ministries, the most popular, the most recurring factor being the situation regarding the release of funding to therefore progress these projects. That seems to be a recurrent reason why many of these projects which were proposed in the individual ministries' project screening briefs have not had the traction that is necessary to carry them forward.
Okay. So where were we before 2020 with that? Where were we? Let's say we adopt the approach like everybody, like I've heard a lot of lay people, 2020 didn't happen for them. Where were we before 2020?
We very much were very similar to where we are now. We have not made.
So we can't blame 2020. Okay, let me take another one. Lack of a comprehensive disaster risk management policy. What does that mean?
Madam Chair, I believe that similar to what Mr. Romano was referring to in his responses, for example, the National Environment Policy, which provides for the establishment of the National Council for Sustainable Development, it comprises several stakeholders, and those various stakeholders need to be coordinated and need to be on the same wavelength in order for us to make progress. So this reference of the disaster management risk policy is to similar a scenario.
Okay, so here's what is missing for me. Okay, I have a home. All right, a fire warden could come and tell me a number of things that are wrong. So until the fire warden comes, I sit and I wait for the fire to occur. That's what is coming over to me. Okay, with all due respect to everybody, and I would love to contain myself. I see everything I've seen here is like a shifting of the sand. I think that's the best way I could put it. When I hear about disaster risk management policy, so one is saying without a policy agreed by some, I don't know which entity because you haven't told me that, nothing happens. So we sit and we wait till everything is destroyed. Do we look at something like the Sendai framework? Do we look at that? Is that factored into anything that we do? I think that is international, best practice to help guide us until we create a policy. Do we look at anything like that?
Through you, Madam Chair, like yourself, I had some concerns when I heard about entities and coordination. So to the PS, exactly who's expected to coordinate? If it is not the ministry, if it is not the EMATT, exactly who is supposed to coordinate? Because as the chairman pointed out, this is quite scary.
I wonder if is it the Ministry of Finance?
Apologies, Chair, my mute was on. Member, I acknowledge that the responsibility for coordinating will lie partially with the Ministry of Planning and Development. However, I must continue to make reference to the fact that the Sustainable Development Council comprises several stakeholders, and the Environmental Management Authority, who chairs it and is co-chaired by the Ministry of Planning and Development. We would try to work hand in hand together towards achieving that task.
Member Mark, might I ask you to join the conversation at this stage, please? Okay. All right. Okay. So, all right. So I appreciate that some members are having difficulty with joining the conversation, and therefore I would like to ask, in terms of the monitoring, verification, and reporting system that is supposed to be set up. If I understand the conversation, then to the EMA, it means that this has not been set up at all.
Chair, the monitoring, reporting, and verification system is for greenhouse gases with respect to climate change. Right. And that has been set up. And that is operational. I mean, the expert on that, I think, is on this call, Mr. Kumar Singh. I mean, and he can tell you that, listen, that is a success. It is not like these agencies are doing nothing. We are doing a lot. in terms of fruition, in terms of seeing the fruits of our labor, that is happening. And this project is one of the projects where we are seeing that. And the EMA is very happy to have been the repository of this information. And I also want to put a plug that what we need is really a central depository for data, because there is so much data in all these agencies. And we have been pushing this to the what they call it, the recovery committee and this committee and that committee. We've been pushing it to all these committees. But that is what is necessary in this country. It will make monitoring and evaluation so much easier if there is a central repository for data, because then we can convert data into information, we can do all the analyses, and then we can move forward. But the MRV with respect to climate change is happening, and I don't know if Mr. Kumar Singh wants to say some more. I mean, he's surely the authority on this.
Okay, so is Mr. Kumar Singh, can you join us? Because I got the impression, thanks for the good news, but I got the impression that there was certain technical gaps for the operationalization of the system. There was a need for some sort of consultant review. So I don't know if those things have since been done. Mr. Kumar Singh, good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, colleagues. Maybe it might be useful if I contextualize more broadly and then zero in on the MRV system. And perhaps in some of the bullet points that were submitted regarding some of the challenges that we had. And I could speak maybe using the climate change policy and the MRV system specifically as examples that could be used as a typical kind of example on some of the things that we need to address. So the climate change policy expressly provides that the Ministry of Planning, the Multilateral Environmental Agreements Unit, of which I'm the head, to coordinate the implementation of the policy. Now, to do this, we have developed what is called a climate change focal point network, which we have representatives from all agencies, ministries, private sector, CSOs that we liaise with, and we basically get feedback from them and exchange ideas on how we can build capacity. Because capacity issues is really one of the main, if not the main challenge and barrier to getting things done across ministries and across agencies. And part of that capacity issue is really also understanding the context and the roles in which these agencies and ministries have in the broader policy framework. To that end, what we have done is basically look at some of the issues that need to be implemented. We have mapped the roles and responsibilities of the ministries and agencies, and we are now trying to engender an understanding of what is required. So, for example, in the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, we have, with these agencies and stakeholders, developed a monitoring and evaluation template, which they are now filling out and completing and returning to us every so often, highlighting what they have achieved in the context of the NBSCP and in the context of the roles and responsibilities. And more than that, what challenges that they may have that we can address or make recommendations for redress. In terms of the climate change policy specifically, a lot of the enabling environment is not present, both from an administrative, an institutional, a policy and a legislative framework. So some of the basic things we are now trying to address. And permit me to highlight in particular the issue related to the MRV. Now, measurement, reporting, and verification. We cannot manage what we cannot measure. And specifically in this regard, we are speaking of greenhouse gas emissions. And if we are talking about greenhouse gas emissions, we have to be able to demonstrate that we are reducing them, or the measures that we are taking to reduce them are being effective. And therefore, to do that, we have to set up the enabling environment. And the measurement, reporting, and verification system is really that enabling environment. It's the first time that we, as a country, have done this. So you would appreciate that there would have been some teething problems. And this is really what we designed and conceptualized, and with the support of some multilateral organizations, the UNDP, for example, the GEF and the EU, we specifically designed the MRV, which is now housed at the EMA, as Mr. Romano would have said. And we engage with what we are calling now the emitters. We have engaged with the emitters, including ministries, government ministries and agencies, and in particular the private sector, to conduct a pilot project in which they submitted their data. We trained them. We conducted training sessions with all stakeholders on how to collect the data, how to calculate their emissions using international standard methodologies, and how to submit them into a portal, a secure portal that the EMA can now receive the data. We also trained members of staff of the EMA on quality assurance and quality control and data checks to make sure that they're in line and it's good quality data that they can stand by. So the pilot project basically tested the system where emitters submitted their data, the EMA performed the quality assurance, quality control checks, and so on. And that pilot, as with all pilots, was aimed at tweaking or testing where there may be gaps, where T's needed to be crossed and I's need to be dotted. That has been completed. We've gotten the report back, and we are now addressing the constraints and the gaps that have been identified. And a huge part of that is really the need for enhanced capacity and training, and which we are now working with the UNDP to enhance the training of members of staff of the EMA and other stakeholders. But in order to institutionalize, to create that enabling environment and the legislative enabling environment, we are now looking at the legislative review of how the MRV system can now be entrenched into law and how greenhouse gas inventorying and emissions can now be made mandatory. So that is ongoing. We have hired a consultant under a separate project. As you would appreciate, Madam Chair, the finance is always an issue. So we have basically looked to external financing and grant funding to do much of this work. And we're thankful to those who have provided. And so we're using grant funding to do this. But the aim really is to institutionalize, to make this redundant in a sense and make it routine. So that when it comes to international reporting on climate change, because we now have a commitment under the Paris Agreement to reduce our emissions, and in order to report on whether we are doing good or bad, we have to measure it. And this MRV system now is really geared towards doing that. So a lot of things are happening in tandem and simultaneously to create that enabling environment so that once it becomes operationalized in law, then the capacity would already be there at the EMA and with the stakeholders who need to support and provide data and to do that. What we are also doing is since you're talking about greening the economy, is enhancing that MRV system now through incorporating the requirements under the Paris Agreement and decisions taken by the Conference of the Parties of the Paris Agreement regarding transparency and reporting. So we're now expanding the scope of the MRV to incorporate those reporting requirements and to build the capacity. So the aim is, and hopefully very soon, once the recommendations for the legislation is complete and submitted, then we can have a fully operational system. And based on that, we can track not only our international reporting requirements, but we can also track national policy objectives, including under the National Environmental Policy, of whether we are achieving the low carbon development trajectory that is expressly stated in various policy documents, including National Climate Change Policy and the National Environmental Policy. So public awareness as well is not only for the public at large, but it's also government ministries. And trying to convey their roles and responsibilities in the broader context of the national policy is something that is ongoing. But as I said, many ministries, many agencies lack the capacity both in terms of human resource, both in terms of financial resources, to really put the systems in place for that full incorporation. But it's a work in progress. We have advanced fairly well in terms of getting that coordination done and bringing the policy framework closer. We have adopted a motto, if you want, of one agenda and many leaders. So the many leaders really is in the various ministries and agencies. We're trying to build champions so that they themselves can understand through the public awareness and education program that we have ongoing and the training of what really is required within their own ministries and within their agencies, and therefore champion that as well internally. So that it's both a top-down and a bottom-up and lateral process that we are trying to achieve. And that is the approach that we have taken. I hope that this has added some context and clarity to what we have been doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So let me ask you something. So right now you have the capacity to do some monitoring, and it's a pilot, and I guess it's because people are voluntarily complying. The legislation, I expect, is something that you all wouldn't have control over. Is there the possibility of increasing the pilot? Is there a plan to increase the pilot as a plan B in the event that the legislation making it compulsory doesn't take place in the time frame that you might consider reasonable?
Yes, and thank you for the question. Indeed, because we have encouraged stakeholders to continue submitting data to the EMA through the MRV system. So the pilot did not really mark the end of the process, but really the pilot was designed to identify gaps and fix them. But we have encouraged stakeholders who volunteered, and indeed other stakeholders, and I must say that we have had a resounding response from the private sector and industry in particular to this effort. And we have encouraged them, and we are encouraging them to get engaged with the MRV system through the EMA and to continue to provide the data that is required under the MRV system. A large part of the inertia, I guess, in that aspect is really the confidence that stakeholders need to know that the data that they are submitting is for what is going to be used. To a large part, we have secured the confidence of the private sector. In fact, they are now approaching us. Industry is now approaching us to see how they can get engaged. So the pilot has not stopped in a sense. It has only come to an end insofar as identifying the gaps as was intended. But certainly entities are still voluntarily providing the data intended under the MRV, because a large part of the reporting framework and obligations under the Climate Change Convention and the Paris Agreement requires that we do national inventories. And invariably, we have to hire a consultant who goes out, and it's like putting teeth, as you would imagine, in the absence of any mandatory requirement. And invariably, the result is that we have huge gaps in the data because you just don't get it, or the quality is questionable, and therefore the usefulness of the report then is only as good as the uncertainty within the report and the data that is reported. So it was bearing that in mind that the legislation is now being drafted to make it mandatory. We have signaled that to the stakeholders. It has been welcomed. There was no pushback. So we hope that with the understanding and the hands-on sort of experience that they would have had, that confidence that I alluded to has been built and on a voluntary basis, and they would continue to provide data to the EMA, and certainly by that example inspire other stakeholders, as we are encouraging, to also get involved and provide the data under the MRV system. I hope I've answered the questions. Thank you.
So based on the pilot and so on, do you think it looks hopeful that as far as the the nationally determined contribution in terms of emissions, that we on track for the 15% by 2030?
Very good question. But part of the MRV system is designed to actually do that, to track the NDC and our achievement, because it's an international commitment, it's a target that we've committed to. But also, I neglected to say that in another project, we are now looking at developing KPIs for the NDCs. Bearing in mind that this is something that the whole world is new to, really, and we should credit ourselves because we are fairly far advanced and have been recognized in leading the way in this aspect of MRVing, if I could make it a verb, emissions. So we are developing in tandem the development of key performance indicators for NDC achievement. And the MRV system now being enhanced to incorporate the provisions of the Paris Agreement will be able to track the NDC achievement along the trajectory to 2030, because it's relative to a business as usual baseline. But more than that, it will also inform whether there may be new intervention options that will be required, depending on changing circumstances, because it is a trajectory based on some assumptions, socioeconomic assumptions and activity in industry and transport. So things will change as we go along, and emissions might actually drop, it might rise, but the KPIs, the key performance indicators will be geared or designed to track the NDC, and the MRV system is actually designed to do that as well. So as we monitor the achievement of the NDC and the implementation of the NDC, we should be able to keep our fingers on the pulse on what is required, or what needs to be changed, or what more interventions need to be put in place to achieve the commitments going forward. Thank you very much.
Any likely time frame for when the draft legislation would be ready?
Yes. It should be in the time frame for that is now at the end of May. It's already underway, and we have been looking and reviewing some of the drafts that have already been submitted. So at the end of May, we hope to finalize that consultancy and make the necessary recommendations where it needs to be made to consider entrenching it into the legislative framework and operationalizing it thereafter.
Member Barthelemy, would you like to come in now? You have to unmute.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, through you, I would just like to ask the Ministry of Finance a couple of questions. In your response to the question, what strategies have been implemented to ensure economic activity begins with an environmentally sustainable lens? In your response, you stated developing appropriate policy and initiatives to diversify and transform the economy by encouraging entities, both public and private, to shift their business and services towards a green transition, which will have a positive effect on the environment and climate change, leading to greater benefits for the population. How exactly do you plan on achieving this? And later in your response, you did mention financial incentives, but what other incentives do you plan on offering businesses or entities?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the question, and I'll ask Mr. Hayden to answer.
Good afternoon. Through the chair, thanks for the question, member. If I look at the response, as we see the response is based on two pillars. We are looking at policies and initiatives on the one hand, And then we are looking at direct action on the other through fiscal incentives. Okay? If I can take the first part first and then I'll go back to the policy after. There are already some fiscal incentives that are already in place. That are over the years, we have been building out a range of policies across different kind of activities. Okay? We have incentives in the with respect to solar, with respect to energy efficiency. We have fiscal incentives that are geared towards reducing carbon emissions. We also have measures to reduce the subsidy on one hand, and there is a drive that has started initially with respect to the movement towards the use of electrics, specifically electric vehicles. So that's basically on the fiscal frame. On the policy side, discussions are still taking place with respect to developing certain types of policies that will encourage certain sectors to adopt certain types of activities that they will take advantage of the specific fiscal incentives that are being put in place. So for example, if we look at the idea of an electric vehicle policy, which is now being a form of discussion of how we can develop a type of policy that can engage those, but I have to say the importers, because we don't manufacture vehicles here, but some kind of policy that will encourage them to shift from the usage of the fossil fuel type of vehicles towards electric vehicles. Now this will be a discussion in the first stage, but there's also a drive that will take place over a certain period of time. Because as you are aware, our vehicle population is highly fossil fuel. So it will mean that the policy will have to be a transitional kind of transformation over a certain period, that we can set some targets to in line with what producers abroad, the international producers, they have already set their targets. So we have to align our policy in line with the targets that they have set with respect to vehicles. With respect to greening, there is some discussion taking place right now with the use of operators within the agricultural sector to move towards solar harnessing, all right, or to change the operation to reduce some of the fossil fuels that they will have and try to harness a solar especially within the agro-processing side. I'm saying all this, remember, because these are still discussions that are taking place. Collaboration is being held together with the Ministry of Planning and Development on all these kind of activities. There's also some considerations being taken place, as you will see in one of our responses, with respect to how best to utilize the levy under the Green Fund. To not only make it as a fund, but also make it as an attraction for operators to be able to measure the kind of reduction that they are having in their operations, and be able to, through that measurement, they can be able to access some kind of rebate on the payment they are making to the levy. So it's, as I say, these things are still at the discussion stage.
So you said that some of these things are still at a discussion stage, right? So is it safe for me to assume that the Electric Vehicle Policy Committee has not yet been set up to start these discussions?
No, there's not a committee set up, but these are areas and initiatives that we are looking at. And once we can get a certain kind of sign off for the collaboration, then we will be able to move to the next stage.
And you also spoke in your response about a phasing out strategy for vehicles utilizing fossil fuels.
Well, as I said earlier, through Chair Member, the idea is we have to move in step with what is happening internationally. Some companies have already signaled that as early as 2025, some of the major manufacturers are shifting their production of vehicles to either hybrid or fully electric. What will happen is that our local players will eventually have to fall in line with that kind of operation. So we are looking at it from that standpoint.
Okay. So just, and this question goes out to anybody or anyone who may be responsible for the communicating of this transition, because we are not only talking about businesses, but the general public has to also understand the importance of the electric policy, the electric vehicle policy. Who or which entity will be in charge of the communications for this to the general public? Could be anyone, I'm not sure.
Well, I would like to think that some kind of communication strategy will have to develop among the major stakeholders, who will be the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Planning, and also the Ministry of Energy. Because there will be, since the shift will be moved from fossil fuels, we will have to have an engagement with the Ministry of Energy also.
And just one more question. You spoke about a national performance framework, which is a tool that provides a consistent approach for monitoring, measuring, and reporting on the implementation of Vision 2030. Can you tell us a bit about this tool?
Well, actually, through the Chair, we responded in that regard with our assistance for the response to the Ministry of Planning and Development, who are actually responsible for monitoring and evaluation of the plan. So our response was guided by our being response that we got through the Ministry of Planning, who can speak better about this monitoring and evaluation.
Mr. Ali, will you be able to assist? And just talking a bit about the National Performance Framework, the tool that you are using to measure the implementation of Vision 2030.
Sure, Ms. Member. Ministry of Planning did put forward, as part of its response, a portion of that that question that you've asked there in terms of the National Performance Framework being the tool to provide the consistent approach for monitoring and measuring and reporting on the implementation of the goals within the Vision 2030. Obviously,
okay. So provide me an example of how the NFP framework monitors and measures the implementation of Vision 2030.
May I ask Ms. Ramisa to respond on this one for me?
Yeah.
Mira.
Thank you, DPS. Thank you, member. I will try to answer that question. The National Performance Framework was prepared as a sort of a sister document to the Vision 2030. So Vision 2030 will have several goals, short, medium, and long-term goals in respect to the 5 development themes that are contained therein. So we would have the ministry through the National Transformation Unit would have defined what the goals were in terms of how it could be measured. They would have also, we would have also incorporated indicators and targets. I can't go into the specific examples, but it's contained in the National Performance Framework, and it can be found on the internet. And in addition to that, the response that we would have sent as well also indicated that while the document is from 2017 to 2020, in 2021, the PSIP would have contained some additional indicators and targets. I would also mention that the ministry is also working on reviewing the Vision 2030 document, particularly in light of COVID, and also to undertake the strategic planning for the next 5-year horizon, which is 21-25. And the ministry would also at that same time, not at the same time, but would also do a new performance framework to coincide with the next planning horizon of 21-25. I also want to mention at this time too that the ministry is undertaking a consultancy to review the national performance framework to see how it could be improved. As you would know, as you would have been told several times, data is an issue. So the ministry, again, through the National Transformation Unit, is working with the ministries to see how they can streamline the collection of data, and that is being worked on. So there are several things that are going on at the same time, but as you would appreciate, the data is proven to be a challenge, and it's something that we are working on. I hope that answered, members, some of your concerns.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on this conversation with the National Performance framework. And in terms of this, I heard Ms. Ramisa say that there's supposed to be a review, and that's for sometime next year. But would I be correct in thinking that, in fact, there has already been a sort of readjustment of the National Performance Framework as a result of COVID?
Yes, to an extent, I would say yes. In the PSIP, actually, PSIP 2021, on page, particularly in reference to development theme 5, in relation to the environment, on page 196, we would have some new performance indicators and targets for 2021. So in a sense, yes, COVID would have been taken into consideration in this aspect.
If you could take out a sample of that, what you talk about on page 196.
Okay.
And say how the COVID or why that was a consequence of COVID. Okay, because I'm tying that back to your answer that where you said, and it supports, however, with the emergence of COVID-19 global pandemic, government through the PSIP 2021 made the pivotal shift to refocus several short-term goals in response to the pandemic, which would ultimately contribute to the achievement of the national development goals in the long term as well. I'm not sure if that statement is telling me we adjusted and therefore we slowed down, or if there was a leapfrog and therefore these goals would be achieved in a shorter time, or they will ensure the attainment of these goals. So that was my concern, and it appears that what you were saying about on page 196 ties with this. So if you could just maybe give us some examples that the words could become real for me.
Okay, thank you, Chair. What I will do is explain what we meant by shifting. During COVID-19, certain sectors would have come up to the top of the list. For example, digitization, agriculture in respect of food security, the need to build resilience within the economy. So it was in that sense, certain sectors and certain areas shot to the top of the list. It doesn't mean to say that the Vision 2030 did not contain it. They might have just been a different priority. So that is what was meant by that general statement, that there was a shift. And that needed to be done because of the limited resources in the PSIP. We needed to have a framework to target the resources. So we would have looked and see what COVID would have thrown up as priorities and tried to target the resources there. So if I have to read one of the examples on page 196, one of the shifts that we would have had, and it's not really a shift, it's just a reprioritization, is building climate and environmental resilience. And there we would have made reference to the circular economy. So if we have to build resilience after we realize that COVID probably had an impact that really shocked us in terms of our inability to be to withstand these shocks. So I'll just read one of the key performance indicators, the quantity of waste requiring final disposal. So that's one of the indicators that was mentioned. And the target is 50% reduction in waste requiring final disposal. So I'm just reading what was written in here. So it speaks to making use of waste and ensuring that it goes towards value added in terms of building resilience in the economy. I don't know if I've explained that.
How do we do that?
This is where
the economy. So I want to know, how do we do that?
Right. So this is where we would now have to talk to the various ministries and come up with certain ideas and projects and programs in order to do this. So at the ministry, yes, we would just set the broad strategic goals. And the next stage really is to have dialogue with the ministries to brainstorm and come up with ideas and projects and programs so that we can effect some of these goals.
Okay, so might I ask something, and maybe the PS could help you out here? This would be for fiscal 2021? What are we talking about? This refocus?
Yes.
This is fiscal 21?
Yes.
We into second quarter fiscal 21? Am I correct?
Yes.
So that's why I asked, how are we going to do this? If I'm now hearing that conversations would take place.
No, not now take place, but these are ongoing conversations that we have with ministries. And so I'm just speaking in general, but we could also go through some of the PSIP projects to see exactly where we would have done some of these things. I know at some point in time, the Ministry of Trade would have had projects where they would liaise or have projects with businesses to encourage them to green their processes. So it is in that respect that the PSIP and the allocations therein are linked to the goals.
Okay.
And speak to the specific ones at this time.
That's the difficulty we have. We want specifics. So I will give PS, Ministry of Plan and Development, I'll give you all an opportunity to submit that in writing. But along with that, the projects that one would have identified, which would have resulted as a result of COVID and this pivotal shift to refocus and so on. And therefore, I expect in a discussion with ministries, projects were identified under the PSIP for that. So what I would want is also for the ministry, so this has to be done alongside the Ministry of Finance, because I would want to get an idea of releases. All right, the status of releases by the second quarter 2021 to the various ministries that align with these projects. okay? Because I think this is laudable, but we want to see that it is measurable. Okay, and therefore, if so, Mr. Deputy PS, when the Secretariat liaises with you all, they would say by what time, etc., that we would want that kind of response to you and to the Ministry of Finance. And I think at this stage, I believe Mr. Kumar Singh wanted to make an intervention based on the discussion we were having with Mr. Manzano. Mr. Kumar Singh?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to provide some more context and elaborate on the issue raised by Mr. Manzano regarding electric vehicles. Building on what he said, we are in the process in collaboration with Denmark Technical University to develop an e-mobility policy, and that has already started. It should be finished by the end of June, recommendations for an e-mobility policy. And that is in keeping with the recognition that climate change has many facets and transitioning to the green economy may have implications in various other sectors, including transportation. I think it was clearly articulated by Mr. Manzano. So the e-mobility policy is also being developed, and that will also include the involvement of various stakeholders, the primary one, of course, being the Ministry of Works and Transport and the Ministry of Finance. But also quickly to add as well that we have also already commenced and nearing completion the development of a just transition policy as well, because there's a recognition that in transitioning to the low carbon and green economy, that it may have socioeconomic implications, particularly for the workforce, in which there are many people employed in the carbon intensive industries that we have running the economy. And so we have been liaising with the Ministry of Labour in developing the just transition policy to ensure that in keeping with the broad sustainable development goals and including the policy, the government policy of leaving no one behind, that any fallout from the greening of the economy, it can be buffered through a policy framework that would provide the guidelines on how to treat with such issues. So I just wanted to sort of create or close the gap in terms of the holistic approach that is being taken from that perspective. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So just let me ask, because my understanding is with greening the economy, of course, people may, some positions or traditional jobs may become redundant. And therefore, I understand, therefore, that there should be other jobs that will surface. So if I appreciate what you say, Mr. Kumar Singh, it means that with Ministry of Labour, these new jobs which will resurface or which will be created, there is supposed to maybe some sort of training plan so that we retool our labour force for the green economy. Is that what I'm appreciating from what you're saying?
That's correct, because new technologies will have to be employed and deployed, and therefore to maintain and to operate those new technologies, the workforce would have to be retooled, reskilled, or trained from scratch, including catering for the next generation of students and professionals that are now going through the university. So it's a broad, multi-pronged approach that will look at training and development of skills and redevelopment of skills as well going forward, in keeping with some of the technological and paradigm shifts that will be necessary in following the trajectory to low carbon development and the green economy.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Romano, in our earlier discussion, you were talking about not having a particular unit. As yet, I think it would be for monitoring and so on. Have you all already created a structure for this, identified the job functions and so on, and made, the requests for the creation of these positions to be able to operationalize the unit?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. Yes, we have. We have established what the unit would look like, the monitoring and evaluation unit. we have costed the unit. We have requested funds as we do every year in our budget, and of course, we understand in no uncertain terms the state of the country's finances, and therefore we know, I mean, it is going to be a challenge to get the funding, and therefore what we have been doing in the interim is trying to use in-house resources, I mean, to do this work. But we have costed, and we have done the org structure.
Okay, and you have no idea of where that is in terms of getting at least approval to begin to resource that?
I know it's with the line ministry. I mean, in terms of getting approvals, and of course, once it's approved by the line ministry, then it have to go to the Ministry of Finance, because the line ministry could say yes, but finance would have to say whether or not the funding is available. So as I said, I mean, we understand, I mean, as everybody else, I mean, that the country is in a difficult situation.
Okay, so maybe the Deputy PS Minister of Planning and Development could tell us where that is.
Madam Chair, those matters are for the consideration of the line minister. As you are well aware, our minister was on some sick leave, extended sick leave, and she has returned to duties today. So those matters do form part of the priority that she will be that will receive her attention in the sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. Okay, so might I ask Member McClatchy to join the conversation at this time? Is there?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I have listened intently to the discussion, and as I said in the pre-meeting, that, and you all have raised all the concerns that I would have had in terms of the how. You know, there is a lot of plans and there are a lot of projections, but based on the discussion we have had so far, I am not convinced that we are quite clear on the how. I still think that the getting the idea of the green economy to work and where it goes is in its infancy, and therefore I would be a bit hesitant to be too hard on our colleagues, but it certainly needs a better framework from which to launch and to get everyone on board. And I agree that it's a work in progress, but it's a work that has to be fast-tracked. Otherwise, we'll be speaking the same thing 2 years from now. So I don't have any particular, I don't want to repeat what was said before, but I am in alignment, especially with your views, Madam Chairman, in terms of how do we get things done? And that's my input for you.
Thank you. I'm just going to page 5 of the submission by the Ministry of Planning and Development. And just to ask Mr. Ali, these projects that were listed here in response to question 4, they go from page 5 to page 6. Would these have been the projects which occurred because of the pivotal shift, or are these, separate and apart?
No, Madam Chair, these projects are not specifically aligned to that pivotal shift. In fact, these projects reference various projects that are associated with various ministries that may be all considered to be related to the green economy.
Thank you very much. And therefore, maybe I could turn to the Ministry of Finance and PS Ministry of Finance. I don't know if you have this information, but I still want to know in terms of, let's say, the Ministry of Energy and the Energy Industries, the acquisition of synthetic aperture radar for the detection of oil spills, where there was an allocation of $270,000, I think that's dollars, for fiscal 2020-2021. Would you have information on whether there have been any requests for releases for this project, and if there have been requests for releases, if and how much has been released?
Good afternoon again, Chair. Unfortunately, at this time, we don't have the information. However, that could be provided. I don't have the information with me, but it certainly will reside with our budget division, and we'll provide the information.
All right, so thank you very much. And therefore, what I would like to do is that there's a list of projects coming to some like $25 million. The Secretariat will forward that list to you to get an idea of requests and releases to these. Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much. If maybe then we could just shift the conversation a bit, and maybe I could ask a question on behalf of Member Mark if he's not here with us. And this is with respect to, we had noted that there is a project for a solar farm at PAAC. And Member Mark wanted to know what would be the relationship between that project and the existing solar farm at, I believe it's Brechin Castle. I don't know if the Ministry of Planning and Development is in a position to answer that.
Madam Chair, just for some clarity, you would like to know the relationship between the two projects?
Yes, so that if it is that if these projects are related to each other, and if they will both, the benefits of the energy, renewable energy, will both eventually go to the grid.
Yeah. I'm not able at this point in time to say whether or not the projects are related to each other. They do have similar bases, and I'm sure Mr. Kumar Singh can give us a little bit of the details regarding the benefits that would redound as a result of the solar farm projects. That is on the provision that, Chair, that you're interested in hearing those as part of your response.
Okay, so Mr. Kumar Singh, maybe I can ask the question whether these are related, whether one will tie into the other, and therefore, with that, then you could, explain to us the benefits of that in terms of reducing emissions and the change to renewable energy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, they are related in the context of aiming to achieve the reduction in carbon emissions arising from power generation. The solar park at the PAAC International Airport is being funded by the European Union through its technical assistance through the GCCA Plus program. And that has two parts. One, it aims to build that solar park at PAAC to supplement the energy requirements of PAAC International Airport with potential for grid tie-in and therefore supplementing the overall power requirements of the country. The second part is solar installations on 12 sites that have been identified, and that is being managed by the UNDP. That will also basically work towards the same end. The solar utility scale solar plant at Brechin Castle is part of the 10% renewable energy target for supplementing power generation nationally. And that is also being led by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, and I think that's well underway in terms of negotiations. The award has been given, as is well known, to Lightsource BP, and So they're related insofar as the objective of what they intend to achieve is concerned, which is the reduction of emissions from the power generation sector. And they will contribute to achieving the nationally determined contribution commitment under the Paris Agreement in the power generation sector. I trust I would have answered the question. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much. I don't know if Member Bacchus would like to join the conversation at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. Couple things. Anyone who's familiar with me in terms of how I work in these GSCs, I pay patient attention to language and jargon as it relates to what is written in these reports. I have a measure of concern as it relates to, and not necessarily that it was a bad statement, it's just that it carries with it specific connotations, and it relates to where we were just a while ago, Chair, through you, as it relates to the things that you identified as the issues that would have affected the placing the environment at the center of social and economic development, and you would have read out the bulleted positions within that. But just above it, one of the things that was identified is that there were two external shocks that had deleterious effects on the program and project implementation due to limited financial resources and disruptions in implementation due to lockdown measures. And the word that concerns me in this is lockdown. I am unaware that Trinidad and Tobago is or has been under any lockdown. Yeah, we've had restrictions as it relates to things related to the public ordinance, but I don't know that we've been under lockdown. And the reason why I bring it up is that it carries, like I say, it carries with it specific connotations as it relates to a number of things and in a number of places. But I say the same things when it comes to technical jargon. I've explained this in terms of digitization and digitalization and a number of other places. I think we must endeavor to be particularly precise when it relates to explanations and adjectives, adverbs, anything that we're using specific to define the things that are affecting the actual processes and procedures and or policies that we're trying to implement and where we go. So, Madam Chair, through you, I just wanted to make that point. Additionally, there are a couple of things. I really want to compliment you on the success of what you've been able to do so far, but it simply exemplifies my point that I was making earlier. You know, that we have to have a different type of operating model if we want to deal with some of the issues that we have now. We can't use and they won't always apply old school methodologies to address new school problems. Waterfall type, cascaded type ways of doing things have to give way to some of the more modern ways in which we address stuff. What the success you have is a good example. You didn't wait for the policy to be finished. You didn't wait for all of that to be done. You actually knew what the industry required and set about in doing it. And I think that is something that needs to happen throughout all of the pieces that we're doing. It is not about, if you wait until you get all of these pieces in place, there is a level of mutual requirement, particularly as it relates to climate issues and or environmental sustainability issues, that you will find, and you found it, you've said it, a lot of cooperation from places that you may or may not necessarily think it would be. So I'm saying that is an approach that you need to continue with. The pilot project that you did exemplified it. I mean, as much as we're waiting for the policies to ratify the prioritized areas, so the industry standard as it relates to how those things are measured is already established. And if we want to progress and be ahead of where we need to be, then we have to take advantage of that and continue to use those pieces of things. As far as a repository for data, my simple suggestion is contact the Ministry of Public Administration and Digital Transformation. We can help you. You want a way to have a repository for your data? Check us. Be looking for help? We'll give you some help in terms of where that is. The other thing about the Ministry of Planning, and I'm glad that Chair raised these projects, so I know these projects, and these were the projects that were recently spoken about under item 4 on page 6. But these are projects under the ministries that are either direct or very directly related to the issues around the environment and climate change. The pieces that actually larger than that are the general projects, and not just under PSIP, which obviously will come through the Ministry of Planning, but also the number of recurrent projects that you probably will have no purview over, that will impact the entire ecosystem of what we're trying to address in a very significant way. And so even the call circulars that deal with the things as they relate to the budgeting cycle need to address this so that this can be addressed and handled all the way down from the base information that is being presented at the ministry, from all the MDAs. Why that is so is that, well, what is going to happen is this. Almost every project we have has some level of environmental waste. And I mean this from the simplest things. If you say we're replacing computers in any massive ministry, you're talking about, we have old ones. What happens to those? What is the impact of that on what we do? More so, it must be considered in any submission that is being sent to the screening briefs that we do. How is it, what is the environmental impact and or cost? And it must be factored in for evaluation at that time to allow for the project to be approved. Many a project globally has, while very good in nature and very well intended, would have not been given the necessary approval because the environmental cost was too high. And so part of the things that we are going to have to publish and part of our reckoning as it relates coming out from the Ministry of Finance is what is the cost associated with the environmental correctness of the things that we're doing. And that has to be a significant factor in where we are and where we go. Because there is a cost to this, and those costs are, they're very different. The impacts and so on of it are very different. Well, we're not going to do this, but this is the impact. We talked about, what we talked about, e-mobility and all that. All of those things have impact. And it's not just, the measure is not just the fact that we're going to reduce the carbon footprint. There are a number of social and another type costs that we must and have to address. And lastly, talking about the monitoring unit, and this one is the one that concerns me also. We had a protracted conversation specifically about where we were and the fact that the policies have to be set there before we can set the PPIs and down because of the significant spread of what we were doing and the prioritization of the 4 areas and that they were not in chronological order, etc., etc. Unless you are doing what I was saying before, which is understanding the industry place and where you need to go, then it is impossible for you to create a monitoring unit with a structure and a job description. Because structures are primarily the vehicle that allows you to fulfill some type of strategic mandate. And if you're saying the policies and so on have not been set yet, it is interesting to figure out how you're going to figure out what that strategic mandate and therefore its outcomes and outputs would be without understanding them. So the answer I could get from that is that you pretty much know in a very general sense where you want to go. And so that piece of what I'm saying is the adoption of that type of philosophy in a number of the things that you do. You're already doing it in a number of places and you're seeing the success of it. I am talking about a more global adoption of that type of thinking and way of doing things that will set us where we need to go. Madam Chair, that is what I wanted to.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask something, and I don't know if this is to the Ministry of Planning and Development or to EMA. Are we engaged in the MCR 2020? MCR 2020. Are we engaged in that? Are we aware of it? M
as in man. Man, MCR 2020. No, we're not, because I'm not familiar with it, Madam Chair. What is it?
Are you Ministry of, okay, so.
No, Madam Chair, sorry.
This comes under, I never get this right, but the United Nations part that deals with disaster reduction and preparedness, and so it's UNCRR or something like that?
That's all under the Sendai framework, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the what they call them, what disaster management, and they were driving that.
Maybe that's something we could look at. There's funding under that. Maybe that's something that we could look at, and maybe you all could then submit to the committee if this is something that advances us in getting the green economy, and if there are possibilities under that for funding. But more to the submissions that we have. In the submission of the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Finance had indicated, and this is on the second page in response to the second question, that it continues to maintain a continuous coordinating arrangement with the Ministry of Planning and Development on aspects related to the environment, climate change, and the green economy. And that the Ministry of Planning and Development is engaging stakeholders both in public and private sectors on these issues. In this regard, it is envisaged that a comprehensive plan on the overall cost analysis of the implementation of the green economy will be developed following these consultations. I read it out because it involves the Ministry of Planning and Development, but it's not their submission. All right, so I wanted to know where these consultations are in terms of the costing of the implementation of the green economy. And I guess this will go to the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Oh, apologies, Chair. I was confused. I thought you were saying that the Ministry of Finance. You said that it was...
No, actually, the Ministry of Finance said something about you, so that's why I read it. And therefore, I've taken that as the gospel, and therefore I'm asking, where have these consultations reached? Because Ministry of Finance needs your input to be able to do the costing of the green economy.
Chair, maybe if Ministry of Finance could be a little more specific into what consultations you're referring. I'm not aware. Yeah, I mean, I know you've read it out, but I haven't. It doesn't ring a bell to.
Okay, so may I ask the Ministry of Finance? This is page 2 of your submission, and the response is in response to the question: has the Ministry in collaboration, which will be the Ministry of Finance in collaboration with the Ministry of Planning and Development, done a comprehensive plan on the overall cost analysis on the implementation of the green economy in Trinidad and Tobago? And therefore the Ministry of Finance put that foundation of that responsibility on the Ministry of Planning and Development. So maybe the Ministry of Finance could therefore speak to us about it so that the Ministry of Planning and Development could hear and then maybe respond to my question.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yes, you go ahead. And as a member of the team in the Ministry of Finance, I consulted with officials at the Ministry of Planning and Development concerning this this comprehensive plan and cost analysis. Right? The information I received from the Ministry of Planning, senior officials there, is that at this stage, a plan has not been developed as yet, but that there are consultations are taking place with stakeholders in the initial stage. And following these consultations, some plan will be developed, and then they will come back to the Ministry of Finance to discuss whether there will be some cost implications involved with respect to the plan. Now, if you notice on our submissions, you will also see in the last page a number of companies and agencies that the Ministry of Planning and Development has reported to us, where discussions have been taking place across all different aspects of the green economy. Okay, so my initial discussion was discussions are taking place with stakeholders, and following those discussions, a comprehensive plan will be developed, and the Ministry of Finance will be engaged at that stage.
So the comprehensive plan, because what I'm concerned about costing, so that comprehensive plan would have been a costing.
Well, it will include a costing.
Right. All right. So I'm not sure that I understood, though, what was answered in question 2 to have been related to what was there in 3 on that second to last page there, where they're doing draft of the plan, and I think that plan is the NDC implementation plan. I think that's what that response was, but you know.
Madam Chair, as you look at the statement again, it says, we have reviewed, or we envisage that when the plan has been developed, then discussions will take place with the Ministry of Finance for the costing aspect.
Okay. So I don't know if that sheds any light for Mr. Ali in terms of answering, you know, where these consultations have reached, because I think the Ministry of Finance, to their credit, are really trying to focus on them not being in the usual position of people saying they didn't have the money. They're trying to identify up front what it's going to cost so that they can then look for the money. So you need to tell us where these consultations have reached towards this plan that could be costed.
Sure. So, Madam Chair, I mean, further to the, obviously, the costing of all the various projects that are part of the public sector investment program, that can be summarized as part of our submission, but in specific reference to the NDC implementation plan, I'll defer that question to Mr. Kumar Singh, who will be able to give us some guidance on that.
Mr. Kumar Singh.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In the context of the NDC, when the NDC was developed, which was extracted from our carbon reduction strategy, a cost estimate was done for the target that was arrived at through extensive consultations with stakeholders from across the board. And the subsequent commitment, or the NDC that was submitted, was estimated to cost around $2 billion to achieve the target. Now, in light of the apparent, or the at face value, the prohibitive costing, what we did was develop an NDC, a financial investment plan for the NDC that costed various activities that were identified in the NDC implementation plan. But more than that, also identified possible sources of financing through multilateral entities such as the Green Climate Fund, for example, and the Global Environment Facility, among others. So the NDC financial investment plan was completed, and the NDC is acknowledged to be implemented through a mixture of domestic and international financing. One of the components of the NDC actually is an unconditional component, which is state funded, and that is through the CNG NGC fuel switching program to convert vehicles from liquid fossil fuels to compressed natural gas, which is well underway and is already reducing emissions. So the financial investment plan was done with the NDC implementation plan in mind, solely for the NDC implementation. And that has been completed. And we are now liaising with the Green Climate Fund to develop projects that will attract funding from them to implement various aspects of the NDC, bearing in mind what was identified in the financial investment plan.
Thank you. But I just want to say this, and if I'm wrong, if I'll be corrected, I seem to get the impression that when we're talking green economy, to some of us, we're thinking only climate change and that sort of thing. But, you know, my understanding is that green economy is much more than climate change. And therefore, if the response I am getting to the submission made by the Ministry of Finance on question 2 only relates to climate change, then I think that I was really mistaken with respect to the conversation on the green economy, because, and I think the Ministry of Planning and Development in part understands it, because when they located the conversation in theme 5 of Vision 2030, placing the environment at the center of social and economic development, okay? And they talk about the development of a comprehensive and well-coordinated system to address the many interconnected environmental issues, including natural resource management, waste, pollution and chemical management, built environment management, and climate change. I didn't see biodiversity and ecosystems, but I guess maybe that goes into the blanket natural resource management. Okay, I thought that those are the things we're talking about when we're talking green economy. So when Ministry of Finance answers that they will do a cost analysis of a comprehensive plan, and they're waiting on the Ministry of Planning and Development, I didn't think it was just climate change. So I don't know, Mr. Ali, if I am mistaken.
Madam Chair, you're not mistaken. Green economy does refer to that all-encompassing group of that you've described. There are other, besides the climate change factors, there are other things that have been in play and ought to be part of the costing. For example, I know that our glass bottles, which are processed at our Carib Glassworks Limited in Trinidad, are recycled into new bottles, and this is a direct representation of how we have been, how one of the things that allows us to recycle and avoid wastage in the system, and this would collectively have to be costed into that overarching plan that you refer. But at this point in time, I can't give you any further detail today.
But the conversation will continue.
But the conversation will have to continue.
Okay, thank you very much. And to the Ministry of Finance, in your submission, you had spoken about the Green Fund executing unit being properly resourced to address all projects, initiatives to drive the green economy implementation. What does that mean?
We understand that there's a green fund execution unit under the Ministry of Planning and Development, and within the estimates, when I inquire, I inquire to find out if the unit is operating, if it's being funded, and if there is funds put into the estimates, so that this unit can carry on the mandate that is there. My information is that the unit is operating and their funds have been put in the estimates for the unit to be properly resourced.
Okay, so this statement is a reflection of a discussion you've had with the Ministry of Planning and Development, or is it just a conclusion you've made based on the funding you provide?
It's a combination of both. It's an examination of the estimates as well as a discussion with the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Okay, so maybe then I should ask the Ministry of Planning and Development in terms of whether this green funding executing agency, if in your view, if you're properly resourced, if you get your releases on time, and if not, how has this affected the operation of this unit? And maybe you could put it in a context to tell us what the green funding executing unit does. The Green Fund Executing Unit.
Yes, the Green Fund Executing Unit does form part of the Ministry of Planning and Development. At the moment, I am aware that it operates on a very much a limited human resource capacity, and that efforts are underway in putting forward for the consideration of the Cabinet recommendations to have the unit staffing expanded based on the advice of the current leader of that particular unit. That note for Cabinet is already prepared and has been forwarded for the attention of the Minister only today. So in that aspect of that particular unit, it is receiving current attention. With respect to releases and the funding of the unit, I don't have that information at hand at the moment.
Okay, all right. So that basically, if I understand well, the position of the Ministry of Finance that you're properly resourced, you accept that. Okay, because the fact that you have your human resource capacity is not what you would like it to be, has nothing to do with the Ministry of Finance. It has to do with you asking for what certain posts that you need and so on. Agreed?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. And then to you, Mr. Pearson, in the Ministry of Planning and Development, and you know where to direct this in your ministry. I think you have an integral role in promoting the creation of a circular economy, of building climate change and environmental resilience and so on. How and what mechanisms do you all employ in the Ministry of Planning and Development to ensure that programs, policies, public awareness, private sector bias in to the creation of the circular economy and building climate and environmental resilience?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kumar Singh is going to be able to speak to the topic of resilience and that entire correlation and buy-in. Kishan?
And who will deal about the circular economy?
We'll try to tie. He'll try to tie it into the response. If not, I will try to summarize just in a couple bullet points I have here. If he doesn't get it into his answer.
Okay. Mr. Kumar Singh.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, DPS Ali. Yes, so that, okay, maybe to preface what I'm about to say by acknowledging that the green economy is much wider than climate change. What the approach that we have taken is that building climate resilience or addressing climate change is a national development issue, and therefore integrating all considerations of climate impacts based on a changing climate needs to be integrated into all aspects of national development planning and the national development process. And to do that, we are engaging with, we have conducted, for example, a climate risk assessment and the capacity needs for building resilience. And we are now in the process of actually rolling out that to various ministries and agencies identified within that study and that assessment, including the development of a financial investment plan for rolling out the recommendations coming out of the study. So there is a continuous engagement with ministries, with agencies to identify, again, as I said before, their roles and responsibilities in building and integrating that aspect of climate resilience into national development. And the approach that we're taking is not the traditional approach that seeks to address climate change and climate resilience from a project-based perspective, where you fund projects or you develop projects and you implement them in anticipation of impacts that may be, a few years or even decades away. But rather, we have adopted what is called a pathways approach, which is to address issues and the impacts and the risks associated with not only climate change in the long term, but also with climate variability in the current climate in terms of extreme weather events, extremes in temperatures and so on, so that the impacts and the risks associated with the current variability can be incorporated into management plans in other ministries and agencies. So, for example, the water sector and the co-synergy and linkages with water management issues such as agricultural irrigation and crop yields and so on. And as well for public health, for potable water availability, for sanitation and so on. So the climate risk aspect is being addressed from a resiliency perspective by integrating climate risks consideration into the strategies and the strategic development process among all sectors and all agencies, so that it comes together in one whole, so that you identify linkages, synergies, co-benefits, potential conflicts, so that, again, in keeping with the one agenda, many leaders conceptual approach. In terms of the circular economy, that of course deals with aspects outside of climate change, but largely perhaps driven by climate change because it's the most topical issue, and perhaps where you can have a more immediate kind of response to emissions, cutting emissions from the various sectors. But circular economy also deals with resource management, as you correctly stated. And to do that, taking advantage of some of the available funding under the Basel Convention, for example, or the chemicals and waste conventions, we are developing waste management approaches that will seek to minimize waste, because then you don't have a linear trajectory between resource use, product development, and then product disposal. So you have now, when you reach the graveyard of products or even services, that they can be recycled back into the value chain, and therefore you minimize demand on raw materials and resources. And that is how the approach that has been taken in terms of addressing the circular economy from a waste perspective, for example. Just given the waste perspective as an example, but that can also be applied to any other aspect. And one of the most important things that we lack as a country, I think, but has been on the table for years, is how do we factor in natural accounting into the national accounting framework, the values or the value of mangroves, for example, the ecosystem services that they provide, the livelihoods that they support, what their real value in monetary terms can represent, and what their replacement value may be, if it cannot at all be replaced, because we'll have to accept that there might be some permanent loss and permanent damage arising from impacts of climate change. But not only that, but also from the development paradigm. So the development paradigm now has to take into consideration that circular arrangement. Because we live in a small island state, we have limited resources, natural resources, limited land, and therefore we could very easily find ourselves in a very precarious position if that approach is not taken or factored in. So national accounting and natural accounting has to be taken into the natural capital and be accounted for in monetary terms, so that the real value can be appreciated, and therefore the development paradigm will then have to, the cost of the development paradigm will then take into consideration what the real cost is for that development, including impacts on the natural environment. And then, of course, as data and information comes to hand and then a database is built, then you can revisit the approaches, because it's an iterative approach in developing and implementing the circular economy. But it has many and myriad facets to be considered in its rollout and its strategy. I hope I've answered the question. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay, so thank you. Certainly from the climate change aspect, and this is why I keep coming back. I think in the discussion, I'm not hearing anything about the circular economy in terms of from production to consumption and waste, because even in production, waste is generated, and how is that waste created and put back into the production cycle? And Mr. Kumar Singh raised a very important point, and this is natural accounting, and I don't know that discussion has begun anywhere. And it comes back to what is the role then of the Ministry of Planning and Development in bringing about this green economy, which has subsets of the blue economy, the silver economy, the circular economy, the climate change. Some people even talking about the caring economy. And I looked and I saw if the Ministry of Finance, who spoke on your behalf, Ministry of Planning and Development, with respect to the stakeholders that you all have engaged. And I don't know, having regard to what Mr. Kumar Singh said, who is part of your ministry, I'm not seeing that you have engaged the, ICAT of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is coming from within your own ministry. So, I seem to be in the conversation, while I've heard some really lovely things and read some lovely things, seeing a sort of lack of the interconnectedness of which you're right. I'm not saying speak, of which you're right. Okay, so maybe Mr. Alia was a bit precipitous, and maybe you could tell me about your role, meaning your ministry role, in promoting the circular economy, and in we won't bother with climate change. Mr. Kumar Singh has dealt very adequately with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would want to agree with you in that it is the Ministry of Planning and Development's role to ensure that there is that level of interconnectedness, as you may have said, between the various ministries and between the various agencies, to ensure that the national agenda is, that we all work towards the national agenda, towards achieving the national agenda. So whilst I accept that as our responsibility, and I accept that that is what we refer to in our overall planning, our overall submission, at this stage here today, I'm at limited. I have limited further information that I could possibly provide to you. So if need be, I would have to submit that as an addendum to our submission.
Okay, so just answer me this, and I don't know, I guess this is maybe either Ministry of Planning and Development or the EMA. I read somewhere that we measured in 2016, we were ranked 62nd out of 180 countries by the Yale Environmental Performance Index. Has there been measurements since then? And if there's been, what have we ranked?
Hayden?
We have more than one Hayden here, so you have to say which Hayden you want.
Sorry, Mr. Romano?
I don't remember doing anything in terms of that submission. I don't think that was the EMA submission as far as I am aware.
No, I'm not saying that that's somebody's submission. I said I read somewhere.
Yes, and could you repeat, please, Madam Chair? Sorry.
And my reading it somewhere would have had to have been maybe in the National Environmental Policy, right? That the Yale Environmental Performance Index in 2016 ranked us as 62 out of 180 countries. I'm asking if such a measurement has taken place since, and if so, how were we ranked?
Chairman, I am not aware of a more recent a measure. I mean, but we can surely check. I mean, since you have.
But we are aware of the Yale, just so that we show that I'm not making things up. We are aware of the Yale Environmental Performance Index.
Yes, we are. Okay. Yes, we are.
All right. So if we could check on that. And while I have your ear, Mr. Romano, and I'm sure now I'm going to get delightful news about the circular economy with the IKEA projects and so.
Yeah.
And I think this is the point Member Bacchus was making based on certain things that Mr. Kumar Singh said in his neck of the woods. There appears to me to be an appetite for recycling, certainly in the collection of bottles and tins and beverage containers. Okay, there is a bin that I pass every day that is IKEA, and I mean, if it is one thing, people take pride in putting that form of waste there. Okay, so in your submission, you were talking about establishing permanent collection sites across Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to know where we've reached with that, how many sites, if you have identified how many, with what you've been identified, would that adequately serve Trinidad and Tobago, or if you're going about on a phase basis, if you can, share with us something with respect to that.
Well, again, that is one of the successes and you're so correct. I mean, the public has really embraced IKEA, and the bins have been very successful. There are now some 788 collection sites throughout Trinidad, and now we're happy to say that the project is now happening in Tobago in 2021. There were some challenges with Tobago, but that has been taken care of, and we are now in Tobago. There are 3 collection depots where the waste go to, which is Namdevco in Port of Spain, Forest Park and Guanapo in Arima. Really, we have done, I think we've done a great job with our partners funded by the Green Fund to create the enabling environment for recycling of beverage containers in Trinidad and now Tobago. What needs to happen is we now need to move further as we go along into the circular economy. We need to get to things like extended producer responsibility, meaning you have all this packaging, whether it's for whatever it is you're selling, and you're actually selling some item. You need to have some responsibility with respect to the disposal of that item. And so we need to move towards extended producer warranty. We need to move towards deposit refund systems. And we're saying not only deposit refund systems for beverage containers, but deposit refund system for other items, electronics. There is something happening with tires in terms of you pay money for leaving your tires at certain depots. We need to look more into that system because we are not sure how it operates. But the country, if we're talking about greening, we need to look at every activity, every sphere of activity. And Madam Chair, I think you're right. I think the public understands and the public is willing to move forward. But we need to put the systems in place.
So what you're talking about, is that what you would have described as the infrastructure to be put in place for effective recovery and process for collection of recyclables? You're talking across the whole gamut.
Exactly. So we've done a fairly good job with respect to the beverage containers, and you're right. Glass is absolutely no problem because there is a company that will take all the glass, and that has been operating in Trinidad and Tobago for a long time. So the same thing needs to happen with everything else. And the project was supposed to lead to really a whole recycling industry. And that is really in its infancy because a lot of the plastics are now being exported. There is very little that is being used locally. And again, we need to find out why.
All right. So the plastics is what this PET wash line.
Yes.
All right. What did that cost?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember. I mean, that was a little while ago.
Okay, but you could let us know the kind of cost of that.
Yes, we will. We surely can tell you. I mean, that's an easy fix.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
In Little Life, I was lucky enough to be part of this initiative, and I agree with the chairman. It was extremely successful, and the EMA was always very willing to help whatever borough corporation and needed to set up that particular system. Being from the Arima Borough, we benefited tremendously from the Guanapo Center. But one thing I always wondered about the paper aspect. Now, the borough, we did some work with ACE Recycling, but I'm always wondering why it says we are not pushing that also. Is that something that we are going to move towards? Is that part of this? Because I can agree with you that the plastics do extremely well. Of course, would like to see more everywhere, but from what I saw, witnessed firsthand personally, and the fact that you could send people from the EMA to guide the process through really made it tremendously easy for anyone to implement once they're interested. Because I understand that you all even do it for neighborhood groups that are interested. So it's not just corporations. It doesn't matter how small, someone is always willing to guide you. But the paper aspect is something that always bothered me. And I'm interested in that.
Yes.
Thank you for that, member. Yes, paper was not part of the ICARE project. Actually, the ICARE project was beverage containers, electronics, and tires. We have not done a great job with the electronics and tires because we've been concentrating on the beverage containers. But we are saying that as we move forward in terms of greening the economy and a circular economy, we need to move into all waste. As we are very optimistic that the EMA's waste rules will be here. We're hoping before June. I mean, as I said, it's with the CPC, so it should happen very quickly, and that should now be law. And that will assist, especially in terms of the larger, because there are thresholds with respect to the waste rules. It's not for litter, it's not for domestics, it's not for residential, it's for really the larger generators of waste.
Okay, so Mr. Romano, you said the project included electronics and tires. You haven't done well with either. What are the plans? I want to say, as far as tires, something must be happening with tires. I don't see tires, and maybe I've changed my route. I don't see tires like I used to see before. So I really thought that there was some project that was dealing with tires. And I think at one stage, there was an incentive of getting some return on used tires. So I don't know if you could shed some light on what your plan will be for tires, what your plan will be for electronics, and when those plans will be operationalized. So, I think must have been in 2000, I had gone, I was then in local government. We'd gone to Australia, and they did all their walkways, their pavements and roads. They were surfaced with the byproducts of tires. And that just amazed me. And it's 21 years later. And I can't see something like that in Trinidad.
Well, tires are well used in terms of asphaltic concrete mix. I mean, and we're not doing it in Trinidad as far as I'm aware. I know SwimCall had an initiative with respect to the tires, and I'm not sure where that went to. Yeah. But as far as we know, and as I said, we're still doing some work on it, there is a $20 deposit fee on tires. And I don't know if the Ministry of Finance could help us. I mean, if the money goes to the customs, or where does the money go? Because if you go and change your tires, you have to pay $20 per tire for disposal. And most of the disposal, we know it supposed to take place at SwimCall. Whether that is happening or not, we're not sure. So with tires, we have some work to do. With electronics, we started on a very small scale with some small entrepreneurs who were, requesting used electronics. So we started it on a very small scale with them, and we're looking to see how we could broaden that. But we're trying very hard not to overextend ourselves, Madam Chairman. Nobody likes, everybody thinks that things should happen quickly, and we sometimes agree, but we also have to look at what are the resources that we have.
Okay, and can you also just enlighten me on what is happening with, and you mentioned it, the beverage container deposit refund system. In your submission, you had spoken about collaboration with stakeholders and so on. If you could just shed some light on that and where we are.
It is being driven by the Ministry of Public Utilities, and there are a number of other agencies involved in terms of the Ministry of Planning, the EMA, SwimCall. And I think what is the thinking right now is that we need to simplify it. It needs to be as easy as possible for the public and for the manufacturers and all the stakeholders involved, and the private sector must be involved. Because if we're trying to drive this thing called the green economy, the private sector, who is really the drivers of the economy, must be involved. And therefore the discussions are continuing, firstly at the public level, in terms of the public sector level, and then it's going to be driven out into the private sector.
Okay. Might I ask if any other member wishes to ask any questions at this stage? Mr. Bacchus?
Yeah, just to provide some additional information, I know you had asked about the Yale EPI. I actually had the data before, I just didn't bring it up, but there is a one for 2020, I think is the one I have, and I could tell you. And as of that time, 2020, we were ranked at the API rank was 69, and they measure it in 10-year variances across whether you were better or not, and the 10-year variance was a plus 10 points, meaning that maybe 10 years ago, just for an approximation, it doesn't mean in between it couldn't have been higher or lower, but there's a plus 10 where that is concerned, meaning that we're better now than over the 10-year variance. It could have been higher in between, but as of right now, we're at 69, and there's a full breakdown for the Trinidad and Tobago piece by 32 different categories, 47, but 32 different components of those categories.
All right.
It's very interesting reading, and I would suggest everyone have a look at it. It's available publicly on the web.
Good, thank you very much. And might I ask you one other question, because you volunteered. From what you've read, we ran 69. Would have been out of the same cohort of 180 or a larger cohort? It
is out of the same cohort of 180, and it does, there is a downloadable file, and it does speak to the areas of air quality, sanitization, heavy metals, waste management, and so on. And it does include biodiversity and the other aspects of it. It would be interesting to know where this data comes from, which is what I would go back to the EMA to ask. But this is actually how we are ranked in there, and there are comparisons to other Caribbean islands, etc., etc.
So I guess EMA and the Ministry of Planning and Development will have a little opportunity to familiarize themselves.
Yes.
Thank you for letting us know that there was a 2020, and therefore they could do some analysis and explain to us. Because I asked the question, because if I was 62 and I know 69, I feel I worse off.
Yes.
Okay? So the fact that I'm better off than 10 years ago,
but
it doesn't mean that I'm not worse off than I was in 2016. So you will need to explain that to me.
And the major contributors they can see as well if they want to know where. And like I said, it's set up everything. Like I think they will find the issues. I think they will know where the issues are. But all of it is in the report, and it is available for anyone to know.
And it seems they could collect our data better than we can.
Yeah. Well, again, it's based on what they have. Yes.
The EMA and Ministry of Planning and Development will also tell me whether those conclusions have come to are wrong or right. All right. So I want to. Is there a hand, Mr. Romano? Is that your hand? No. Okay. All right. So I want to thank the PS, the Deputy PS, Ministry of Finance, and all the officials of the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Manzano. I want to thank the officials of the Ministry of Planning and Development, the Deputy PS, Ms. Ramisa, Mr. Kumar Singh, Dr. Guri, and also I want to thank the Environmental Management Authority, the Managing Director, and his support team for this very, very interesting conversation. I read this, and again, just Mr. Romano, I want to say this is not part of your submission, and it's not part of any submission, okay? But I read it somewhere, and I found this very interesting. This is an expert from Finland. And they had said it's circularity and sustainable consumption and production are essential to delivery on every single multilateral agreement, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the Paris Agreement and beyond, because it is turning our unsustainable consumption and production around that we can tackle the three planetary crises: climate change crisis, the nature crisis, the pollution and water crisis. For me, that sounds very attractive. For me, it sounds very hopeful. I'm not concerned really so much about the planet, about Trinidad and Tobago. If we succeed, the planet succeeds in part. Okay, I hope we agree with this. If not, you'll tell me in the submissions, written submissions, and I hope this is something that we could really realize for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank the members of the listening public. I want to thank the media for staying with us. I don't have to wish everybody, well, maybe yes, because some of you all are still in your offices. Safe journey home, and we'll continue this conversation on paper. I want to also thank the members of the committee for their participation. I therefore now suspend this part of the meeting, and the meeting will continue in camera. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair.